seedier side of Paris at the end of the 1800s, and that he liked to paint prostitutes, you come to realize that they're waiting to be checked for syphilis. And so the first time I came across this painting, it was in the early to mid-90s, and it was hard for me to look at a painting that was basically showing us the effects of an epidemic while there was another AIDS epidemic coming around behind me. And so this poem is in response to that painting, and it's dedicated to Toulouse-Lautrec. Returning to the National Gallery to see Rue de Moulin, the medical inspection. Dress hiked up, ass bare, this gal will parade before clients at the 6th brothel down the street. But for now, she waits. The walls a sick orange, her silhouette a question before a man, barely seen, turned in disinterest. Where I stand, you sat, drawing her with charcoal, only to paint the sight later. Strange, how we jot scenes to remember what we never say or show. To the left is the unseen, the doctor waiting to inspect, to say, no rouge, plumed hat, or leg of mutton sleeves will save her, even in your sketch. Even in this museum, where a guard ignores her blotched face, I hide what I most fear. I bring nothing to this dim room, a Sunday packed with visitors and loud shuffles, which stop to complain of the banging down the hall. Construction. We could be on a torn street, atomized with noise expected the night before. New Year's, when I hid in a one-room apartment under blankets and held a man in this cold city. Perhaps that's why I return, not for you, but for chaos, and some relief to chaos, the two together, an edge between. We think all is lost if we're bold enough to move forward. All is lost if we hesitate, as if fearing what one might think of our vision or the touch that remains. A friend once told me the story of a fireman who pulled a stranger from the wreckage. And when he laid the man on the ground, the man whispered, "Please, hold me a bit longer. No one's held me in years." And for once, the story turns heroic. Or is it dangerous? The fireman stayed with him, held him. Why is it so difficult to consider the gestures as real, that anyone would? So there's a series of poems in the book that are in response to different saints. So I wanted to share one of them with you tonight. The first one is Notes on a Saint, Deirdre Bridget of Munster. And she died in 570. So tranquil, she let a beetle devour her side. Townsmen said it grew hog-sized and roamed the halls in fear of her steady gaze. After they walked wide circles around her house, the path a grooved orbit, she wrote letters to her mother. An animal sleeps in my mind, fur thick and mangled, then stuffed the notes inside her mattress. Townsmen said she lived on a manna, though at night her abdomen puffed with air and tree sap, a round hump. In the spring they brought her the blind, 2 parents, a priest. She could do more, they knew. Left stones outside her door, 3 smooth offers for something taken and missed. Is it real? Will it ever wake? A girl asked if her hands bled at night, if they tasted of iron steaks, her eyes wistful as only a girl's could be, her stink dumb like sour milk. She told the girl to leave, walk until she could no farther, and settle there, a true penance. It curls tighter, to breathe a chore. For days the river fought its banks, the air was a broth. Leaves shook rain, and as she waited for the drops to burn her veil, fireflies dawned. their light a mortal light that left her dizzy and sick, the animal large and foul. Transmissions. A woman chatters about her lack of love. On the radio, Scrooge, the cheap nightstand. But at 5 a.m., her southern rasp is better than dreams where nothing moves. I'd rather listen to this stranger, keeping company as she reads, because you exist and because you don't. And this happens to everyone. But the novice loses her collar and dead air leaks over radio waves, like the moment after a hurricane. Air electric, leaves motionless, birds and wind stalled. Somewhere, someone does not exist, so the station transmits recorded sound. All night the booth stands empty, and the world sinks a little, like how that host explained string theory said, if you tear space, it fills itself, like quicksand, rushing into itself after the body sinks. Once, nooked in a near stranger's arms, after 3 sleepless nights, I listened to hockey, the MC naming men and moves and scores, fluid grace in his voice, the blind need to pass the solitude of night. We gripped without words, one inside the other. It might seem real. It might. So, as Michael mentioned, I was born to Cuban parents that are exiles that left after the revolution. And so I heard 2 things when I was growing up. One was spoken and one was unspoken, but I definitely heard 2 things. One, you don't come home pregnant while living underneath this roof. And 2, don't ever date a Marxist. And at the time, I didn't really think much of it. And then one day in my late 20s, I started to date a Marxist and had to call home and say to first my sister, what do you think Dad's gonna say? I'm kind of dating this Marxist and I don't know how he's gonna respond. And there was silence and her response was, you better go talk to Mom. So I called my mother and said the same question, and there was again a pause, and she said, well, I don't know, talk to your father. So I called up my father, and I was a bit surprised by his response. He's like, well, so long as he's polite and respectful and doesn't even mention it, we'll be fine. But there was something about being in my late 20s calling my father, and so I decided to write an apology that wasn't quite an apology to him. And so this is Apologia for Dating a Marxist. We bet on horses, stuffed stubs in our pockets, each brush brief while the pack raced by, until, gripping my shoulders, he leaned in, the crowd unseen, and kissed. It was his edge, black leather slouch, stare, tongue burning like vodka, that drew me. Call it blasphemy, or betrayal, or memory lapse, even defiance. What you said was escape. You left Havana with $50 stashed in a soap bar and a box of tobacco for trade, the boat full of nuns and priests. And after it docked in Spain, the boat caught fire and sank. In my making of the drama, I saw 2 weeks in hiding on a dusty couch, curtains closed, saw a fatigued man stamp papers by rote. Your back no longer straight. We believed we were right. A plant unearthed, dragged indoors, forgetting what lives with it. How red ants line tan buds. Time passes, and it has nothing to do with anything but the taste for more. A long, slow burn. So I've in the people I've been talking to today, Pittsburgh keeps coming up in conversation, and I think it's just because Cleveland reminds me so much of Pittsburgh when I was growing up. So I thought I would read transcript tonight. It's not about Pittsburgh specifically, but it's about Donora, which is about 45 miles outside of Pittsburgh. And it's a poem that responds to what became, well, an event that led to the creation of the U.S. Clean Air Act. And there's a reference to this in the poem, but just to give you a little bit more of a context if you're unfamiliar with it. In 1948, there was an inversion of air, or basically of temperature. And so it trapped all of the poisonous smog, like all the smog and air that was coming out of the zinc plants, and it trapped it into our level. And so basically for 3 days it seemed like it was night because the smog was so thick. And so this is in response to that event, and part of it's also in my mind because we just passed the 50th anniversary, and so the last 2 or 3 individuals who are still alive to tell the story, are reaching. Their story can't be told for much longer. Transcript. Donora, Halloween, 1948. What we stood beneath and within was punishment, God style. The air inverted and trapped the smog, a sick yellow near black, a betrayal we sensed and saw, but didn't understand. To stretch an arm was to erase its hand, like those costumes darting in and out of sight from the parade. Tale of a demon child, gone. A majorette, afraid to toss her baton, gone. The ruffle of skirt. Only noon, and we marched against the distant whistle, marking the afternoon shift. The plant hummed on. Later, a neighbor would rasp truck tires along the curb to find his way home. A daughter would flee, breath held against the restive world, like graffiti promises she knows won't keep. John plus Shane forever. The words swayed, small dandelions of light, tricks of time and space spliced and wound. The brown fields, the unseen sky, the need to believe. Those brown fields still lay beyond the darkness. The sky above would pull the fog up and beyond the valley, and the air would forgive what the rain could not. So I should say for this next poem that if you're easily queasy, you might want to cover your ears for a moment, as it begins with a bit of a striking image. The poem is called Everything Beautiful or Not. Because the lark pierced his back with 18 fishhooks and pulleyed himself between 2 apartment buildings to prove everything beautiful occurs when the body is suspended. His back shaven, his flesh a naked ridge of tents tied to ropes pulled through rings, his arms free to swim above his quiet spectators, who believed what they saw. Because neither a radio broadcast playing Ramon Raquello and his orchestra's dance music, interrupted by reports of gas eruptions off Mars, nor a rocket with a curious humming sound could ever send a city into alarum again. And because war is now a barge of lights and sounds that buoys the waves between a satellite and the living room TV. Because when cleaning the fishbowl, the dirty water rushed down the drain, and Rico, beautiful Rico, slipped through cupped fingers into the garbage disposal. Fished from the blades, the blue boomerang survived half a day. Because when asked to read a poem, my student, a flirt at 12, claims he's an illiterate, then laughs. He asked, "Why write?" And I choked. How explain silence? How in dreams words appear as Sanskrit? And because my student's friend couldn't stand the feel of a pencil in his hand, and I did not wrap the number 2 in rabbit fur, nor tell them Whitman published his first column at age 12. Because 2 artists lived, harnessed by a stretch of rope for a year and never touched, near the end, never spoke. One slept late, the other jogged in place. One reached for pine cones, the other stalled. 2 branches bending their backs to a cord grown taut. Because I don't know what beauty is, I compromised what I saw, didn't see. I know Australian scientists teleported a speck of light. I know the plane's departure and arrival isn't always an end, but abhor it anyway. I know the closest to an eagle in flight for the first time is a Beechcraft propeller, because I have been caught in its soar, my knuckles white from gripping the earth. And I wanted to read 2 more for you tonight. This poem has an epigraph from Jack Gilbert, which reads, "By rain and need, by the weight of what momentarily is." Reason. The closest is a cello. The closer the bare hand, the more pressure, the less song, to dampen what isn't said on the long drive home. He said a deer crashed through the law firm window and died right where he'd sat. And I wanted to hold him, grip that cello's neck and crush its frame, snap wires, splinter wood, but I said nothing. Or more likely mouthed Jesus to air, stagnant and humid and hot. Again, silence is a cathedral door, carved with spirals and suns, so heavy with age, it's impossible to pull open. Though the beyond is familiar, coolness that might offer relief, if not belief, that inside the moment isn't yet a malformed moment. Another deer, splayed on the side of the road, or even 2, grazing in the field you now pass. Here, little moment, here, little moment. If I jangle a treat, will you leap into our laps, stretch and curl, the leash slack, or snap and snarl at every passing car? I have to say that the friend that's referred to in the poem thinks of the deer as his totem. And so if he sees a dead deer, he feels like he's going into trouble for the rest of the day or the week or the month. And if he sees one in the yard, then it's okay. But I live in Michigan, and so does he. And you can't drive the highway without finding them along the side of the road. And so I fear for him in terms of the way that he perceives his world. The last poem I wanted to end on was also the last poem in the collection, just try to give you a little bit more of an uplifting view, I think. And that too also has an epigraph within it from Jaime Sabines. It's the prologue to his longer poem, Tarumba. And I'll give you the translation of that. The quotation translates into a testimony of our untelling. We gather our time and our grief, our eyes, the hands we once had, the hearts we rehearsed. Tilt-a-whirl of our untelling. Because the cemetery gates were locked, you slipped your girl frame through loose bars, only to rehearse the worst. Lift the player's needle, or that song will cage the moment in reels of walking backwards between gravestones, looking out for rabid dogs on the way home. The ice sky flashes. Birds pray, open-mouthed, flocked warnings of what's to come. A hell to all. But nothing came. Afraid to cross the street, the girl waited an hour for her mother. Want her. Want insides hidden like honeysuckle. Want that ailing posture you can't shed. That girl burned a matchbook on the basement floor, then buried the ashy remains with Daddy's mums. Her too. Light will map a past. Go, gather it with the others. The one who crawled through an attic, kicked the ladder, and hid in a car parked by the madhouse until morning scarfed her in silk. The one who left on a boat full of nuns and priests and disembarked hours before the boat caught fire and sank. The world tilts in strange guises. Behold these. Love these. I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank Cleveland State for publishing the book and all that good stuff.